Okay, so I left off with the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 1962. Cuba had become a communist country in 1959 under the leadership of Fidel Castro, and like I said, this picture like creeps me out. And a staunch ally of the USSR, which is a complete containment failure for President Truman and President Eisenhower now. And so what's going to happen is we are going to see the Eisenhower's president, as I just said, and not happy with this containment failure. He's going to start providing support secretly to fund this Cuban anti-communist group to try to get them successful in a revolution. And then this Eisenhower's going to be out, and JFK is going to come in as our new president, right as this Bay of Pigs incident or invasion is going to happen in 1961. So the U.S. had been training, while Eisenhower was president, Cuban exiles. And they will try unsuccessfully to invade Cuba. Unsuccessful pretty much because there's not enough support given by the United States when it comes time for the actual invasion. And that's what we're trying to keep it secret. We don't want the world to know. In response, Cuba's going to be like, oh, no, you didn't, and agree to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba to protect against a future U.S. invasion. If you don't know where Cuba is, it is very, very close to Florida, like 90 miles, and it's named the Bay of Pigs invasion because of the bay in which the invasion took place. So this is going to equal the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. The United States is going to demand Soviets remove their newly installed nuclear missiles from Cuba immediately, and this is going to be the closest that we come to nuclear war with the USSR. This is almost a hot war right here. So the U.S. is going to then, here are the missile launch sites that we can see aerially with our spy planes here. And so the United States is going to place a blockade around Cuba to try to keep any other missiles from getting into Cuba from the Soviet Union. And so there's going to be this, it's like, this is a playing chicken, really. The Soviet ship is coming closer and closer. We have our ship out at the blockade, and it's pretty much like this thing says, we went eyeball to eyeball with the Russians, and the other man blinked. And there's the mutual mass destruction. We have both of our ships going. They're playing chicken. The first person to look away is Khrushchev. The Soviet ship turns, and this is a victory for the United States. And so here's that blockade right here, and then all the parties involved. Khrushchev, because they lost at chicken, really, is going to agree to remove missiles in return for the U.S. removing its missiles that we had placed in Turkey after they had put their missiles in Cuba, and vow to never invade Cuba. This crisis is going to weaken Khrushchev. It makes him look, he'd already put that you need to get out of Berlin or else ultimatum, and nothing happened out of that. Had to build a wall, and now he's made this ultimatum here in Cuba, and nothing he's the first one to chicken out. So we're going to see that this is going to be one of the lead-ups to the collapse of the USSR. Out of this is going to come the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So something positive actually is going to come out of this. The United States, the USSR, and Britain is going to sign a historic treaty banning atmospheric testing in an attempt to reduce Cold War tensions. France is going to refuse to sign because it was in the process of developing its own nuclear weapons program, and China is going to become a nuclear power in 1964, so it will also not sign because they are both just kind of getting off their feet. And so next we need to talk about the fall of Khrushchev in 1964. There's like a whole laundry list of reasons why, and I mean, I've already gave you my spiel on Khrushchev, up 1 minute, down the next. So, Khrushchev's going to come out of the picture. His Cold War foreign policies were seen by the Politburo, so remember there's still that elite group ruling, as erratic and ultimately unsuccessful, because they were erratic and ultimately unsuccessful, such as the Berlin crisis and Cuban Missile Crisis. Expensive space race and armaments programs postponed any significant shift to consumer goods, so his economic programs were not working. The most important reason, however, is going to be his agricultural projects backfired. And really we're going to see that they just need a fall guy. They need a guy to place the blame for things not going well in the USSR. And there will be a resurgence of conservative Stalinists, or those hardcore Stalinists, led to the quiet removal of Khrushchev in October 1964. And this is where we'll get Leonid Brezhnev, who will become the new general secretary from 1964 to 1982. And we're now getting into territory of which I was on this earth, 1981. So, the Soviet Union and Cold War under Brezhnev, we're going to follow just as we followed the Cold War over Khrushchev. Beginning in 1964, the USSR began a period of stagnation and limited re-Stalinization. So we had de-Stalinization under Khrushchev, now we're going to get re-Stalinization. Massive arms buildup is going to start in response to the humiliation of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the humiliation of losing chicken with the United States. What is ironic about this is the USSR is going to, however, avoid direct confrontation with the United States and is going to seem more committed to peaceful coexistence than Khrushchev ever had been. And so while they're re-Stalinizing and building up their arms, our relations are actually better. Re-Stalinization of the USSR is going to result to a degree. We'll never be all the way back up to like Stalin, but we're going to see some of that come back. Dictatorship was collective rather than personal through the Politburo, so we don't really have like that Stalin-esque cult figure. We have the elite ruling class with Brezhnev, there's the name and the leadership. There's going to be intense conservatism. A Soviet ruling elite was determined to maintain status quo in the Soviet bloc, and we're going to see that those celebrated nonconformists, such as Alexander Solzhenitsyn, that movie guy that we talked about with the book about the gulags, are going to be permanently expelled from the country. So 1968 is going to become a critical year in world history. We're going to talk about, a couple really important years, but 1968 is going to become a critical year in world history under this re-Stalinization program. And that is because we're going to see the Prague Spring, and the invasion of Czechoslovakia. So in 1968, the invasion of Czechoslovakia was a crucial event of the Brezhnev era. Due to Khrushchev's reforms in the USSR, the 1960s had brought modest liberalization. Remember we talked about he was okay with some different forms of socialism and more consumer goods to Eastern Europe. But in 1968, the reform elements in the Czechoslovak Communist Party gained a majority and voted out the longtime Stalinist leader. And so Alexander Dubček, who is a liberal commie, is going to be elected leader, and it's going to usher in a new period of thaw and rebirth in the famous Prague Spring of 1968. It's going to be called socialism with a human face, or a communism with a human face. I mean, this would never happen under Stalin. He'd be like, kill your face. But so socialism with a human face sought greater democracy and freedom of speech, so very liberal communist. And the influence of Czech reformers frightened these hardline Stalinists and communists. And so we're going to see, just like in the Hungarian uprising, Soviet troops are going to brutally invade Czechoslovakia in August 1968 with the help of other Eastern Bloc countries. And Czechoslovakia will then become one of the most hardline communist regimes well into the 1980s. It's important here because Brezhnev is going to give a document issued in response to this Prague Spring. It says, henceforth, the Soviet Union and its allies had the right to intervene in any socialist country whenever they saw the need. And so this is kind of a mirror image of the Truman Doctrine, if you think about it. We said that we had the right to intervene in any democratic country that we saw fit. And so we, however, don't do much here. We don't openly challenge this statement that Brezhnev has made, and maybe it's because our relations are actually a little bit better under him, but it's a direct contradictory statement to our Truman Doctrine, or a mirror image. And so now a little bit of Germany here. We're going to get the Ostpolitik with Willy Brandt here, so some Eastern politics. So West German Chancellor 1969 to 1974 is going to begin to improve relations or build bridges with Eastern Europe through what he called his Eastern Initiative. Brandt sought a comprehensive peace settlement for Central Europe and a new resolution of the German question. The German question is World War II over? What are the Germany's real borders? All these things that weren't getting answered yet. And he's going to begin to negotiate treaties with the USSR, Poland, and Czechoslovakia that formally accepted existing state boundaries and the loss of German territory to Poland, as well as offering an apology to Poland and the USSR in return for mutual renunciation of force or threat of force. And so it's going to equal two German states within one German nation. Brandt's government is going to break with the past and enter into direct relations with East Germany. And he's going to aim for modest practical improvements rather than reunification. And so he's going to say we don't have to be reunified into one Germany yet, but we can be two German states within one German nation. So very powerful statement there. He's going to try to improve this relationship and brought Germany's Social Democratic Party that we've talked about, the SPD, to national power for the first time since the 1920s. And he's going to demonstrate that two-party political democracy had taken firm hold. And the result of Brandt's policies within Germany are going to be that West Germany's Eastern peace settlement is going to contribute to great reduction in East-West tensions. And Germany is going to assume a leadership role in Europe that will continue. Next, we need to talk about another term then, détente, which means relaxation. And so we're going to see that the United States Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and President Richard Nixon are going to try to place Brandt's Eastern initiatives in broader American-led frameworks. So they're going to take that Ostpolitik, but they're going to call their big picture theme détente or relaxation. This is going to be with President Nixon involved. He's very anti-communist, and we're going to see that that's going to come to play a role later, but tried to place Brandt's Eastern initiatives into broader American-led framework of reducing East-West tensions in the early 1970s. They feared Germany might become neutral, thus weakening NATO and the U.S. influence in Europe, so they want to make sure to, keep this, two states within one nation kind of thing going. Nixon hoped to gain Soviet aid in pressuring North Vietnam into agreeing to end the Vietnam War. It doesn't really happen, but it does bring a gradual slowdown to the Vietnam War. And Nixon is what you would call a realpolitik. Nixon and Kissinger believed U.S. should pursue policies and make alliances based on its national interest rather than on an ideological worldview. So if you had to look at Nixon like compared with Eisenhower or Truman, who were much more idealistic in that they were like, we can contain communism, we can liberate communists. Nixon's gonna be like, we need to make deals that really serve our interests rather than an ideological worldview. And Nixon is going to seek to play the USSR and China off each other or against each other. Nixon is going to be the first president to visit China actually in 1972, and this will concern the Soviets that the China and United States might draw even closer together, which would be a problem, for them, of course, with proximity. But then Nixon is going to visit Moscow in 1972, and it will usher in an era known as détente, or relaxation. And it will seek to establish rules to govern the rivalry between the United States, USSR, and China. And so this is where we're going to get what is known as SALT I of 1972. And so Brezhnev, who is in power in the USSR, and Nixon are going to sign a treaty on this visit to stop making nuclear ballistic missiles and to reduce the number of anti-ballistic missiles to 200 for each power. So we start to talk about armament limitations. This is going to put an end to the arms race, or especially the nuclear arms race that we talked about. Really, you could argue that Brezhnev didn't need to limit the amount because they weren't able to keep up with us, and that's why he agreed to it. But yeah, it is an agreement. And however, the development of MIRVs soon thereafter made SALT 1 obsolete, which are multiple warheads on one missile, but at this time, they're able to come together. Another treaty is going to take place here at the Helsinki Conference after this. And I guess I didn't put a slide in there for you there. In 1975, 35 nations are going to come together. Helsinki is in Finland, if you aren't remembering your geography test from early in the year. It's going to give us what is known as the final act, and it will officially end World War II. So only 30 years later will we officially end World War II, by finally legitimizing the Soviet-dictated boundaries of Poland and other East European countries. 1975 is going to be our high point of detente, or relaxation, because in return, Soviets are going to guarantee more liberal exchanges of people and information between East and West and the protection of certain basic human rights. Yet Moscow, as we're going to see, is going to continue to squelch human rights in Eastern Europe. And the end, because all good things must come to an end, the end of the detente will come in 1979, and things are going to get much worse than they even were before. We're going to see at this time, when we get to this, that Jimmy Carter is going to come as our president, and he is much less of a politique and much more idealistic after Nixon. He is actually going to go on to say that human rights must be the soul of our foreign policy, and is going to want to place a lot of conditions on the USSR. And then we're going to step out of Europe for just a second, but it's very pertinent to why things go so badly again between the USSR and the United States, because the Soviets are going to invade Afghanistan, which will lead the United States to refuse to ratify the SALT II treaty, the continuation of the 1972 treaty that would reduce nuclear armaments, and will lead to President Carter's boycott of the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, which in response the Soviets will boycott the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, and the United States is going to stop shipments of grain and certain advanced technology to the Soviet Union. Only Great Britain is going to stand behind these United States sanctions against the USSR. That's why they call our relationship with Great Britain the special relationship. France, Italy, and especially West Germany argue that Soviets' deplorable action should not be turned into an East-West confrontation. And so Carter's idealistic human rights foreign policy is not going to be latched onto by the rest of the world. They're going to say it's a regional matter and it's taking place in the Middle East, so it's not our concern. But back in Eastern Europe, we're going to see a program called Solidarity, and it's going to take place in Poland. It is Poland is different than the other Eastern Bloc countries because it is still really, really Catholic. And at this time, we are going to get a pope named Pope John Paul II, who is who is from Poland, elected in 1979, and he is going to begin traveling through Poland, preaching love of Christ and country and inalienable rights of man. So there you get kind of your Locke in the Enlightenment in Pope John Paul II's preachings. The Communist Party had essentially failed in Poland because at controlling the Catholic Church, and so it still has a great deal of power. And this solidarity movement under Pope John Paul II is going to inspire a popular movement of working people who organized a massive union called Solidarity. And it's going to be led by a gentleman called Lech Walesa, who is a Catholic. He is still alive. In fact, he got in trouble for some inciting conversation lately, which is too bad that he'll be remembered for that probably more than all of the great that I'm going to tell you about here. But he's still involved in some politics in Poland. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Lech Walesa never calls for change to the regime, to the communist regime, but change within the regime. He's like, it's not that the regime it's that we need to change within it. And he's going to say those changes need to be the right to form free trade unions, right to strike, freedom of speech, release of political prisoners, and economic reforms. This is definitely going to be a part of the fall of communism is the solidarity movement, as we're going to see as we move along. But in 1981, the Polish government, led by Communist Party leader General Jaruzelski, is going to impose martial law after being warned by the Soviets if the Polish government could not keep order, the Soviets would. And so this guy is going to come in with military rule, because pretty much the Soviets told him, if you don't deal with them, we are. And how do Soviets deal with people, especially when they're re-Stalinizing? You would wipe them out. And so General Jaruzelski is actually going to get Times Man of the Year and win the Nobel Peace Prize later, because by stepping in, he is going to, essentially save Poland at this time. And he will outlaw solidarity and drive it underground, but it will remain active, so it's not killed here, and we'll come back to that later. For this moment, though, however, we need to move into the Cold War and revolutions in the 1980s. So the Atlantic Alliance is going to revitalize itself in the 1980s, this alliance of three leaders under the leadership of Ronald Reagan in the United States. We're going to see that Margaret Thatcher, who will be our only female prime minister in the UK, and Helmut Kohl, who is our new chancellor in Germany. So now we have a new big three, totally different. All three of these are going to be very hardline anti-Soviet. So quite a combination here. Because in the 1980s, all three nations believed the USSR was a dangerous threat, especially after its 1979 invasion of Afghanistan. The Atlantic Alliance is going to give indirect support to ongoing efforts to liberalize authoritarian communist states in Eastern Europe. They're really going to help any movement that's anti-communism. That's what that's saying. And Margaret Thatcher became prime minister in 1979 as the Soviet Union was invading Afghanistan, and she's going to come to power after a year of bitter strikes that ended support for the ruling Socialist Labour Party in Great Britain. So not only the first female prime minister in Great Britain, but the first in Europe. As a conservative, she advocated hardline military positions just like Reagan. And there's an incident that really gains her some popularity here, and it's called the Falklands War of 1982. It's actually like really more of an incident. Britain calls them the Falkland Islands, while Argentinians call them the Maltines Islands. And so it's really like this argument of whose islands are they? And that's a question between the Argentinians and the British. The British are going to say they're a remnant of their imperial empire that's now just a couple little places. The Argentines would say they're theirs, but anyway, the Argentine forces are going to invade and occupy the Falkland Islands, 500 miles off the coast of Argentina. Thatcher, the Prime Minister of England, is going to send a fleet to retake the islands, and she will gain enormous popularity and be seen as this like tough broad, conservative, and able to get things done and able to keep the little parts of the empire left. And she will be re-elected as a result of this. These islands, by the way, are still under British control due to Thatcher's action there. Our other of our big three, Helmut Kohl, who is our German chancellor, is distinctly pro-American. He came to power with conservative Christian Democrats in 1982, and he is in line with whatever the United States and Great Britain does. He's like, yep, I'm right there, so he's right on board. And then we have our very own Ronald Reagan, who is going to take a hardline stance against the Soviets during the first term of his presidency. He dealt with Soviets from the position of strength. Don't cut weapons, build more. It's kind of like if you're like that biggest guy like you see a big guy in the hallway, or there's a little guy, which guy are you going to go after? He's going to say, it doesn't matter if we don't want to fight, we just need to look big and strong, we need to build more. Embarks on a massive military buildup. Reagan believed the United States could better bear the burden of the expense because of our economy, while the Soviets couldn't keep up because of theirs. This is her gamble. He's pretty much rolling the dice or betting that our economy could handle this building of strength, this military buildup, better than theirs would, and that theirs would crack before ours. This is called the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. So in 1976, the movie Star Wars had come out, and so with all the lasers and everything. And so in 1983, Reagan announced his intention to pursue a high technology missile defense system like lasers, like he's like, we could have these lasers that would shoot down the satellites or these things, and it's going to be called Star Wars. Reagan's dramatic increase in defensive spending placed enormous pressures on the Soviet economy, so it kind of worked. The USSR is going to be gone in 10 years, but did it hurt us too? Really, there's outcomes, and then we're going to invade Afghanistan too. So did it hurt us too? Was it more quick for the USSR? But what's going to be kind of the final straw on the camel's back here for Reagan and the staunch anti-communist is that Soviets are going to shoot down a Korean passenger airliner accidentally. It's kind of they say it's an accident, that they misidentify it as a spy ship or as a attacking ship, but it was flying over Soviet airspace, and Reagan is then going to call the USSR the evil empire, and so he's definitely he didn't mean to have this known. It was kind of caught on a mic, just kind of like Obama's slip when he was caught, didn't know the mic was there. But he definitely makes it clear what his opinion of the Soviets are at that time. And this is where we're going to get Brezhnev dying. And so yet another leader, I feel like we're in a French lecture with as many leaders as we've gone to. So we're going to have Brezhnev die, and then we're going to have all of these old guys that come, and then they just keep dying. Andronov, Trevanov, they're all really, really old, get elected, they're there for a couple months, die. So after all of these old guys, we're going to end up with Mikhail Gorbachev, 1985 to 1991. He is going to lead to some serious reduction of Cold War tensions. He is going to be the last leader of the USSR and assumes control of the Soviet Union in 1985 and starts immediately seeking reforms. Gorbachev in his 50s wasn't likely to keel over early like these last ones, but was considerably younger than the communist hardliners that preceded him. He is going to give us three policies here. That are going to help the reduction of Cold War tension. I think he has a genuine concern for the USSR. He'll even go on some things such as anti-alcohol movements, like alcohol is hurting our character and our morals and anti-corruption. So I think he genuinely has a deep concern for the country. So his first program is called Perestroika. It means restructuring. And it aimed to revive the sagging Soviet economy by adopting many of the free market practices of the West. And this is huge. That's a big deal to turn to the USSR and say, let's start adapting these free market practices of the West that are working. The program is going to fail, though. Not that it wasn't good, had good intentions, but if you have never had any experience producing anything on your own, it doesn't just come overnight, and so people aren't used to not being told exactly how much to produce and what to do, and so it's gonna fail. But his second program here, Glasnost, aimed to open Soviet society by introducing free speech and some political liberty while ending party censorship, and this will be much more successful than Perestroika. This is adopted, and people wanted this. And then Demokratistisa, really democracy, began as an attack on corruption in the Communist Party, and it's an attempt to bring class of educated experts into decision-making process. So people are going to begin to open up with this perestroika and demokratia. The atmosphere begins to change in the USSR. New books and movies come out that have been repressed during re-Stalinization. In March 1989, you can write 1989 magical year. It is going to be our magical year here. We're going to see the first free election since 1917, the first time there's open debate. Gorbachev is going to seek to reduce east to west tensions by withdrawing Soviet troops from Afghanistan, encouraging reform movements in Poland and Hungary, where the previous Soviets had stomped out those reform movements. And he's going to take back the Brezhnev Doctrine. It's going to shelve it, that no interference doctrine, by pledging to respect political choices of peoples of Eastern Europe. So huge deal here. Is the Cold War ending, is the question you could be asking. And then we see that the INF Treaty is going to be signed by Gorbachev and Reagan in Washington, D.C., December of 1987. And all intermediate range nuclear missiles from Europe will be banned. It represented a major milestone in reduction of Cold War tensions, and cutbacks in START 1 treaty signed in 1990 between Gorbachev and President George Bush would cut 10% of the U.S. nuclear weapons and 25% of Soviet nukes and limit ICBM warheads. This is like the USSR's last-ditch effort to survive. Like, really, they can't keep up with the production, and like the cutting is a good thing, and they're just trying to hang on. And that's what is going to make 1989 such a magical year. We're going to see some revolutions that make some huge changes here. So revolutions of 1989 are going to end communist control of Eastern Europe, just like we'd seen revolutions of 1789 and 1848. The people are going to rise up. Oh, there's the START 1 and the building of the New World. A lot of Time magazine covers in this lecture, sorry. So 1989, the magical year. We're going to see the end of communist control of Eastern Europe by the revolutions of 1989. So the cost of maintaining those satellite countries for the USSR was both politically and economically too much of a burden for the Soviets to handle because they're lagging so far behind economically. So remember that solidarity movement in Poland that we just talked about? It's going to legalize again, and free elections will be promised in June 1989, and this is where they will elect the first non-communist leader in Eastern Europe since the Stalin era, which will trigger a wave of freedom movements in Eastern Europe. Lech Walesa is that leader, and he will become president in 1990. But we'll see that Solidarity will later break up into factions, and in 1995 he will not be elected again. But what is great about Lech Walesa is he says, don't forget the Pope. Because remember, in 1979, Pope Paul II had started this whole solidarity thing. This whole chain of events, really, that lead to communism could almost be attributed to Pope Paul II. So pretty significant, thing there for our Polish Pope. Well, what's really important about this Poland Solidarity movement is it's going to spread. It's like a fever of liberty because the USSR is liberalizing, other places want to. And so in Hungary of October 23rd, the Hungarian leaders proclaimed an independent republic. A coalition government emerged. Borders were opened up for the first time. East Germans are like, now we can get out. Whoa. The fever of freedom continues to spread in Germany. The Berlin Wall will come down in November, and the East German government will fall as a result, and this is in 1989. Germany will be reunified as one country in 1990, finally. Man, we've been a long way since OVB and the unification of Germany. We will see that people then, not only voting, but start voting with their feet. We'll have 350,000 people out of East Germany by 1989. 100,000 with candles will march against the East German government, which results in its fall, and they push the leader out. You might remember the famous phrase with the Berlin Wall, Reagan saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall." Conservative Liberal Alliance for Germany will be tied to West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, that guy we talked about that's like hardlining anti-communist with Thatcher and Reagan. Christian Democrats will defeat the Eastern German Social Democrats. July 1990, East and West German economies will merge, and Soviets opposed unified Germany and NATO, but eventually gave in when West Germany provided massive economic aid to the Soviet Union. And so we're going to have an agreement and allow German unification through NATO even. Then in Czechoslovakia, we're going to have what is known as the Velvet Revolution in December 1989. The fall of the Berlin Wall will inspire reformers to break away from Soviet influence, and a general strike will result in the fall of the communist government. Václav Havel the dissident playwright, so he's an artist, is going to become the president. He just died not too long ago, unfortunately. But he's a playwright, this artist who had criticized the communist government, and he's going to be voted in. And in 1993, the Czech Republic and Slovakia are going to split into two countries. Remember, they had been created and combined after World War I, and so they're going to say we never really wanted to be together. We're different. So that's why on the map today you have the Czech Republic and Slovakia splitting into two different countries. Ethnic differences between the Czechs and Slovaks they weren't able to be a stable, unified state, and so they separated. Free self-determination here. Bulgaria, November 1989. We are going to see did not have an organized reform movement like Poland and Czechoslovakia, but a day after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Bulgarian Politburo will demand that its leader resign, purge Stalinists, and encourage its estranged ethnic Turks to return to the country. So no real organization, but get stuff done. Romania, however, is our exception. So you know how the AP Euro always likes the exception question. So all of these countries except Romania had a peaceful, no shots fired revolution here. Romania, however, has an oppressive dictator named Nicolae Ceausescu, and he and his wife are going to come out and challenge the revolution, because I guess they think like I'm such a good leader that I'm going to come out and challenge you. You're not going to do anything with me. But they flee once they realize this crowd isn't going to listen to them, and they're captured. There's footage of the assassination of he and his wife, and that is an actual picture here at the bottom of his. They shoot them down with machine guns, and there's footage from 1989 of this happening. About 1,000 people die as a result of this revolution. In Albania in 1990, Europe's poorest country, will be inspired by the overthrow of Cesno in 1989, and demonstrations plagued the government for over a year, and the communist government there will fall in June of 1991, which leads us to another fall, the Great Fall, the fall of the Soviet Union.